Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss videos in the future. And if you like this video, don't hesitate to hit like and enter a comment down below. I try to answer all of your questions. I'm going to go ahead and set up the Valvetrain on this 5-liter Ford. One of the most confusing and potentially scary things for amateurs or beginners in setting up a motor like this is setting up a hydraulic Valvetrain. So today I'm going to take you through how I do it, try to demystify the process, and hopefully you'll walk away with a better understanding of how to set the Valvetrain up in a 5-liter Ford. When it comes to setting up a Valvetrain, the first thing is for you to have a clear understanding of what exactly it is you're trying to do. So in this case, it's a hydraulic roller Valvetrain. The lifters are roller, the rocker arms have roller fulcrums and roller tips, and it has hardened push rods with aluminum heads and push rod guides. Your objective at the end of the setup is to have all the valves set with the hydraulic plunger in the lifters compressed slightly. That's called the preload. And to have all the rocker arms properly locked down so that they won't back off. Before you start your final Valvetrain setup, you want to do a number of preparatory things. Examine all of the Valvetrain components. Wash them, like in alcohol or with brake clean or something like that. Then pre-soak them in engine oil. I use a bath of 2050. 2050 stays with the part longer. It's there when more likely to be there when the engine starts up. Look for defects. In this case, 2 of the Ford Racing lifters were jammed. The plungers didn't move in them. That's going to be a big problem when you start running the motor. And 1 of the comp rocker arms had an extra snap ring on it, which of course wasn't in the groove. It's going to fall off. It just came off in my hands, and now you got a hardened piece of steel going to go through the motor, which isn't good for it. Make sure that these parts are right. Anything that rotates, turn it. Anything that compresses, compress it. Make sure it really works before you start putting it in the motor. The correct way to set up a Valvetrain like this is do all the intakes in engine firing order, then do all the exhausts in engine firing order, making sure you're on the base circle for each cylinder. When you're ready to actually set things up, I suggest leaving the lower intake off if you've got the motor on the stand like this, so that you can see what's going on with the actual lifters. Especially if you've never set this up before, finding zero lash can be one of the trickiest things, and by feel, it can be extra hard if you've never done it before. So being able to see with your eyes what's happening with the plunger and the lifters can be a big advantage. Okay, so I started with the motor at top dead center on the compression stroke for cylinder 1. I went ahead and put push rods in all of the holes. I lubricated the tips of the push rods and the tips of the valves with extreme pressure grease, which will help during startup. Then I've turned the motor over ever so gently until I see our exhaust valve on number 1, or exhaust lifter on number 1, slightly coming up. It's just beginning the exhaust cycle. You can see the lifter if you've got the lower intake off like this, or you can see the push rod just start to move up. At that point, you're on the base circle for cylinder number 1 intake. So you can proceed to start setting up cylinder number 1 intake. You're going to take your rocker arm, slide it over the stud, make sure that it seats in the push rod and that the push rod is properly seated in the lifter. Make sure that it's lined up properly on your valve tip, which it should be if you did your adjustable guide plate setup correctly. Then you're going to tighten down the adjuster to find zero lash. You want to back the lock right out so that you never have the lock interfere with finding zero lash. And then you're going to tighten this down until you've just taken the slack out. That's the zero lash point. Now I think one of the most common mistakes that guys make is instead of finding zero lash, they don't have a good feel for it, and they end up with the plunger fully compressed. They call that zero lash, and then when they do the preload, where they turn a half turn further and then lock it down, they actually open the valve. So I'm going to bring the camera around so you can see what's actually going in here, and I'm going to show you how I find zero lash and hopefully demystify that process for you. Okay, so the way a lot of these systems say to find zero lash is to twirl the push rod in your fingers as you tighten it down. But I find this is not a very good way to do it. Yes, you can feel it drag, but it's not all that great. What I prefer to do, let me just back this off again, is jiggle it up and down like that. And you see there's a little play there? So we'll keep tightening until the play comes out. And if you got the right feel for this, you'll feel, once the play comes out, you'll feel it just begin to give a little more resistance on the adjuster nut there, okay? That's zero lash. Now, let me show you what often happens. I'm gonna put a wrench on this so we can do this. Guys are doing this with a wrench, and if you look, we start at zero lash. You can see that push rod keeps going down, and it keeps going down until it bottoms out the plunger. And then at a certain point, right about there, it really tightens up. So if you miss that first little bit of resistance, it starts to have the same resistance all the way until the plunger is completely compressed. Now this is totally compressed. So if you were to go in this far and then turn another half turn thinking you're setting the preload, what you're actually doing there is hanging the valve open. Now you will probably be able to see that. I don't know if we'll see that on camera. If I begin to press this, yeah, you can't see it on camera, but I can see the valve begin to open there. That's definitely not what we want. So let me back that right back out. And if you have the lower intake off, like I do here, you can see with your little eye whether or not you've started to compress that plunger. So that's the real secret to finding zero lash. Turn this until you just start to feel resistance, and use an up or down motion to check when you've got zero lash. You got to be gentle. The first time or two you do it, take your time. Be absolutely sure. Up and down, that's zero lash. I can twirl it, but if I back off a little bit, it doesn't feel very much different twirling it there than it does there at the zero lash point. Okay? So hopefully that demystifies that process a little bit for you. All right, so once we've found zero lash, I'm gonna make sure this is right. I can feel that just tighten up, and I have no play, right? Just tightened and have no play. Then you want to preload the lifter, okay? So we're going to start here with a wrench like this. You can use a ratchet, but it's better to use an open wrench like this so that you can hold the wrench in place while you go ahead and tighten the poly lock down. So I can see the way this lined up, we're at about not quite straight up and down. So we're going to turn it a half a turn. That's how much I'm going to preload these. So that's just about exactly a half turn. Then we're going to use our Allen key in this case to tighten down the lock. Okay. Now, when you do this, tighten it down tight. Don't be shy. You see how I'm doing this so that it's actually bending this Allen key a little bit. Don't be shy about tightening that down tight, because if you don't tighten that tight, you're going to end up with the lock backing off. Rocker arm backs off, even falls off, causes all kinds of issues. Okay, so when you're done, rotate the rocker arm a little bit, make sure it moves back and forth. You'll feel there's some real tension on there now. If you try to rotate it, there should absolutely positively be no play. If you look in there with your little eye, you'll see that you've actually compressed the plunger in the lifter just a little bit. And if you come around to the side here and look at it, you should see that the rocker arm centers on the valve tip. Now, it's going to move a little bit back and forth either way. So what you want is when you move it, say, all the way this way, and you move it all the way that way, that you have about the same amount of overhang or non-center on either side. If that's not right, then you didn't get these guide plates lined up right, and you should redo that step. But I spent a lot of time on the guide plates to make sure everything's right. Everything lined up here as expected, and so on. So once this one's done, that's it. It's locked. Everything's good. We're going to move on to the next cylinder in firing order, which is number 3. Do exactly the same thing. Go through all the intakes. Then we're going to come back and do the exhaust. So the correct place to set it for the exhaust is turn the engine over until the intake push rod moves all the way up, past maximum lift, and then half to 2/3 of the way back down. So not fully closed, but well on its way to closing. Then you'll have your exhaust lifter on the base circle. And the procedure to set up the exhaust is exactly the same. The only thing that's different is the procedure to get the lifter on the base circle. And our next cylinder is number 2. That's this one. Okay, so what we want to do is make sure that our lifter is pushed down all the way. If we don't have the valley open like this, you can just push it down with a push rod, but make sure it's pushed down all the way. We can also see that our valve, our intake valve on number 2 here, is open. So we're just going to turn this until that valve goes past full open, where it really is there, and then goes down about halfway, something like that. Now it's easy to see on the lifter when you have it like that, but you can see quite well with the rocker arm if you have the valley closed up, if you have the manifold on. When you're first doing it, if there's any doubt, there's no harm in turning this motor over backwards. So if there's any doubt, turn it until it closes, then open it back up a little bit, and go back and forth a little bit to make sure that you understand what open and closed really looks like from the top. Okay, so we're on the base circle for exhaust number 2. We're going to grab our rocker arm out of the oil bath, and we're going to make sure that the machined surface where the adjuster goes is facing up. Don't make the mistake of putting it in with the fulcrum upside down. One side is machined for the adjuster nut, one side isn't. I'm going to slip that on. You can use gloves for this. I have such a hard time with gloves, but in any event, you want to try and keep your hands clean. So I keep lots of shop towel around here. And we're going to grab our lock or adjuster out of another little oil bath, and we're going to thread it on. Now, this should thread on easy. If it binds, for God's sakes, stop. Examine the Examine the part, examine the stud. Make sure that nothing is galled. Clean it up. One of these adjusters had some crap in it still, apparently, so it bound. So I immediately stopped, cleaned it up. You can run the lock through it, all the way through it, as a way to clean it up. If you can just feel this just start to drag, and you'll see you got a little play there. As you turn this down, you'll feel it just start to drag, and that's zero lash. Okay, so because I had these two bad lifters on this build, I'm compressing all of these lifters to make sure that they really compress as a final check. You don't normally have to do this, but I found zero lash. I'm just going to turn this in, and I'm going to watch that plunger really goes down, and you can feel it really jam at a certain point there. That's when you've got the plunger fully depressed, and if you turn any more, you're going to start opening the valve. So I can see that plunger's working, everything's good. I'm going to turn this back out until I've got some play. You can see it jump up and down there a little bit. Then I'll turn this in, wiggling it until that just stops. There. So the free play is gone, and I've gotten just a little resistance on there. So we know we're in the right spot. We're going to go ahead look at where the wrench sits, which is about straight up and down. I'm going to turn it in half a turn. If there's any doubt on this, don't hesitate to redo it. Then what you should find is this should take a little bit of effort to turn in. And if it's all oily, like this has been soaked in oil, you'll feel it drag a little bit as it's working the oil out. Then you can hold it with the wrench and really tighten that down. Okay, that one's done. So now that's all set up, let's just turn it over and we'll watch for any issues. Make sure it turns cleanly. We're going to find number one top dead center. There's our intake closing. Okay, so there's intake and exhaust closed. That's number one top dead center. We'll look through here. We'll look for clearance issues this way. We'll look for rocker tip issues. That's one revolution. Two revolutions. Three revolutions. Four revolutions. I'm going to go slightly backwards. Okay. All right, we're back at top dead center number one. Everything turned over clean. There was no contact problems, no jamming. It's all a good sign that we did the rest of our checks earlier in the build, piston to valve clearance and so on, that we did those checks accurately. Put a final wipe, and we could start working on valve cover clearance. which we know these valve covers are never going to clear without some work. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell so that you won't miss out on future videos.